Hello, my name's Lizzie. I'm Anglican. In 9 days' time, I'm going to be moving into a convent ready to become a postulant. And another question that I've been asked quite a lot is, will you be marrying Jesus? And the short answer is that the community I'm going to doesn't use that phrase or that image, but other religious orders do. So that's the short answer. But if you want to hear a bit more on the subject, then keep watching.
I will hold your people in my heart.
I've definitely come across, like on YouTube or on the internet in general, religious orders that do definitely use a kind of more bridal imagery. And I've got this little booklet that someone gave to me as a present, and this definitely talks about Jesus as your potential future spouse if you do go on to make final profession. And so that there, and I've seen pictures and video clips of religious orders where when someone makes their final profession, they like the moment where they promise to keep the vows of like poverty and celibacy and obedience like for the rest of their life on that big day. It's kind of seen like a wedding day. And I've seen, yeah, some pictures and video clips where the sister who's making her final profession actually walks into the chapel like in a full like bridal dress or bridal gown. And I've seen others where they might wear a nun's habit but have headwear that looks more like a bride's. Um, I completely understand that kind of imagery because I get that if you're not marrying in a kind of human sense, then it makes sense to still use that imagery, but you're choosing kind of a life devoted to Jesus instead of a life devoted to like an earthly partner. And so you're just using that same wedding image and transferring it to Jesus. Like that's how I understand it, and that makes sense to me. But I also know a lot of religious orders that don't use the wedding imagery, but it's still a massive day, like the day that you make your final profession, and it's a day that you're. But it's just not seen in a wedding way. It's seen as this is the big day when you solemnly made to you solemnly promise to keep like the vows for the rest of your life. And I've seen a lot of, well, I know a lot of sisters that are like fully professed, have made their final profession, and they're all wearing a ring. And I've seen some sisters with a ring on their left hand, and maybe that is maybe it's on their left hand because they belong to orders where final profession is seen a bit like a kind of wedding service, or they're using the bride imagery. But more often, all the sisters that I've known like personally and visited in person who are all Anglican, I'm pretty sure all the sisters I've met in person have actually had a ring on the fourth finger of their right hand. And as far as I'm aware, that their ring is not so much symbolizing that Jesus is their husband as it's symbolizing it was given to them on the day they made their final profession, and it's symbolizing the vows that they've promised to keep for life. So it's not quite a wedding ring. That's my understanding of it anyway. So the community I'm looking at, it doesn't use the bridal thing. So I personally wouldn't be marrying Jesus if I kind of went the whole way with this community. Oh, and just another little thought to add, when I've been thinking about it, I've thought about how like when you get married to a human being, you're promising to stick with that person for the rest of your life. And the way I see it is if you've got to the point where you're actually making your final profession, and making these vows for life with this religious order and this religious community, to me that's actually more like marrying that community, because you're of course you're vowing to stick with Jesus for the rest of your life, but in a way every Christian is. Whereas the day that you make final profession, in my mind, that's the day when you're actually promising to stick with this religious community for life, like through thick and thin and through the difficult times as well as the good times. So that's just something I've been thinking about if you're marrying anyone at that point, in my mind, it's more like you're marrying the community, or you're promising lifelong loyalty to your religious community. Actually, like personally, I don't see such a link between religious life and the imagery of marrying Jesus, because a lot of my prayer life or something like that is influenced by the more kind of mystic kind of tradition of Christian spirituality and Christian prayer, where Jesus is seen as bridegroom anyway, or Jesus is sort of talked about as bridegroom. And I read a lot of things where, like, Song of Songs is quite a central, like Song of Songs is probably one of my favourite books of the Bible, but it's that kind of imagery is sort of central to my kind of spirituality. So, but bride and bridegroom is just part of my prayer life and the prayer life of a lot of people, regardless of whether or not they're looking at religious life. So I just see that the imagery is very separate from religious life. And actually the kinds of things I read about, where they talk about different, maybe like stages of spiritual life, but when they talk about kind of union with Jesus, they're talking more about a kind of a spiritual maturity you get to, like, or you might get to eventually, and that spiritual maturity it's more to do with your prayer life or your spiritual life, and it's rather than you going into religious life. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but so for those kinds of reasons, I just see bridegroom, bride imagery as more of a kind of form of Christian spirituality. Then I don't see it as connected to religious life.